So let me pray for us. Thanks, Father, for the day. Thank you for good vacations and time away for many people, I think. And I ask that you would be with us today. Help us learn a little bit about the Second Temple and maybe your word, and through all of that about you and your Son. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so we're in part 2 of Moses. Is Moses a superhero, is what I've titled this. So, and the answer is yes, he's a superhero in all the coolest ways ever. If you were here last week, we did almost three different ways in which he is. We talked about his birth story, and we talked about his, well, you tell me. This is good teaching, good pedagogy here. What do you guys, what did we talk about last week with Moses? Anybody care?
I remember the heart turned to marble.
The heart,
stab him.
his neck. No, his neck turns to marble, and he tried to chop off his head. So yeah, so those are the battle scenes. So the battle scenes of Moses. Moses gets in a lot of wars, a lot of battles, and he becomes super powered. Davin was just remembering that his head turned to marble, or his body turned to marble, and the Pharaoh couldn't cut off his head. So just very cool, these what we call Second Temple interpreters. So a few of you were not here last week, so let's do a very, very quick review. So we're talking about the Second Temple. Okay, tell me very quickly a few Second Temple books.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Good, excellent. All right, so the New Testament is one of those 27 different books that we have that are Second Temple. What about some other ones that are not New Testament books, didn't make it into our canon?
Enoch, Jubilee. Wow.
Excellent. Enoch, Jubilees, yes. Testament of Abraham, Testament of Moses, the Assumption of Moses, all kinds of different things. What?
The Mishnah.
Maccabees.
Maccabees, right. So all of your apocryphal, almost all of your pseudepigraphical books, and we've talked about different ones that there are. So yeah, Apocrypha is the Catholic, between 9 and 13 different ones, depending on how you organize them. There's a couple of additions to the book of Daniel, like Susanna and Bel and the Dragon. Are those different books, or are they, how do you add them up? So we don't know. It doesn't matter what the numbers are. First and second Maccabees, first, second, third, fourth Esdras, all those. Some of those are apocryphal, some of them are pseudepigraphical. But Second Temple is the time of Herod's temple. Herod, from the Jesus story, right? So it's that time period. Now, this temple was built way before that, right, in the 500s, but it was added onto by Herod later on, and so it becomes known as Herod's temple. Is that temple still standing? Correct. One person is nodding, two are nodding their heads. It is not still standing. Is there any part of this temple that is still standing? What is that called? That's right. You don't even have I could just tell by your voice. I could see your mouth moving, Brad, but you didn't have, you're muted. So no one knows what you said.
The Wailing Wall.
That's right. The Wailing Wall, right? So you stand there with your Yamaha and take your Prairie Quest and you put it into the stones there. And it's pretty awesome. This temple is huge. This is the time period of these interpreters that we're talking about. Okay. So everything's about how they interpret the Bible. We do care about how we interpret the Bible, but we can't start interpreting the Bible until we've seen how other people interpret the Bible. So those of you who are familiar with my little, here we are in our church. We've got our stained glass windows and stuff like this, and we're out here, and we're very intelligent. We've got our little cap on, and we got our binoculars. Can anybody see what I'm drawing here? Probably not. Anyway, and we're looking into the past at an event that takes place. Right? Did I go right across the spot where you can't see? So this is an event. So maybe they're describing what happened. We're talking about Moses, right? Moses is a superhero. So they're looking at this event and they're seeing Moses stands up and saves Zipporah and her sisters at the well. Or the Egyptian and the Hebrew get into a fight and he separates them or kills one of them. Remember that? And buries them in the sand. Okay, just nod your head like you have a clue what I'm talking about. Yeah, you remember some of these stories? Okay, so Moses is born and the whole place fills with light. Okay, that's not in the event, right? That's a later thing. So whatever happened in these stories, that's the event. We have no idea what happened, remember? No idea what happened. All we have is someone's interpretation of that event. We're making an assumption because, I don't know, maybe we're evangelicals or Bible people. Maybe we want to make the assumption that this author is telling us about an actual event. But there are lots of people who think this author is just making up stories to give people a story later on. The truth is, it's probably somewhere in between, right? There's probably some reality behind these things. There's some kernel of truth in there, but it probably doesn't look the way the author is telling it, because even he is telling you a story for a different group of people, for his group. So if Moses is telling you the story of Noah's Ark, then he's going to tell it for the people in his world. So he's going to give you different things. So maybe he's going to tell you about how large the Israel got under Moses. Well, Moses doesn't go in. Under Joshua, for instance. And he's going to give you numbers. Maybe those numbers aren't really Joshua's numbers. Maybe they're David's numbers. But he's taking those numbers and putting them back on there because he's trying to tell a different story. The people reading it during David's time are going, oh, I see what's happening here. Does that make sense? He's putting new information in there so that they'll read the story in a new way. So the stories change depending on where they're at, whether they're in Samaria or Israel, Lower Israel and the Levant, whether they become Egyptian stories, whether they end up going up to Thessalonica, like Turkey, up above the Mediterranean Sea, wherever that, stories are going to change because they're talking to a different group of people. That's a pretty normal thing. So this is a key part of this. When we do our interpretation series, which I'm going to do probably in September, we'll spend a lot more time on this in detail. But what we're talking about here with Second Temple interpreters is this whole other group, okay? And I have brilliantly named them the other group, okay? Because this is the kind of brilliance that comes out of this. Yes, thank you, Dr. Blaze there, so for the thumbs up and the smiles from the rest of you. Okay. So event, author, other, okay? And then of course there is us. Okay, all vowels, if we include I, O, U, A, E, right? So you can remember it. See? It looks like this heuristic device. I know you guys are just, okay. So these are people who are looking back at the author's interpretation of the event and changing that story for a new group. He's already changed the event, probably, if there is an event that's there. You know what I mean by if there was an event. Like, was there a flood where Noah was on the water? A lot of scholars would say no, that's just a story that comes back in their late memory of a huge flood, and it just kind of penetrates down to them. And what they want to do is they want to rewrite the story to tell about God, their particular God, Israel. Israel's God, right? Yahweh. So he's changing this event. And when I say he, it's almost definitely a he, right? Women, you have no power in this world whatsoever. Sorry. Okay. So he, and then lots of other he's are going to come in. These would be people around. Okay. Let's say this is a traditional view of the author. Let's say 1450 BC. That's Moses's world. Okay. The event, I mean, who knows what he's talking about, right? It's primeval. Let's say Abraham is, who knows, 2000 BC. Okay, just making stuff up at this point. The others might be, if we're talking about Second Temple others, they could also include like exilic authors. So we got the exile people or monarchy people. So monarchy is like 1000 BC, exile is like 700s to 500s. Okay, and they're interpreting this. And then we have later on interpreter, Second Temple, which is going to be probably somewhere between 200 BC and maybe 70 AD. Because something pretty significant happened in 70 AD. What was that? Something happened in 70 AD. No, is everybody muted, or are you guys just? You have to unmute yourself if you want to talk.
Was destroyed.
The
Temple was destroyed.
Thank you. Now everybody's talking at once. Good. Okay, yes, the temple is destroyed at that point, right? So this is the time period that we're talking about. What I've done is I've elongated this a little bit, and I've included like rabbis, later rabbis. Even though the later rabbis are going to come out 200 or 300 or 400, maybe even 1,000 years later. I tried not to get anybody from 1,000 years later, but 200, 300 years later, these ideas that might show up in 300 AD are likely as old as this. So they're talking to you about traditions that have been around for a while. So I included them because they're fun. And I wanted you to hear the way different people interpret all these things. Okay, so you have your base now of how we're interpreting things. So what we've got is what I chose were 5 different things about Moses that make him into a superhero. The first one was his birth narrative. And we talked about that a lot, right? Especially, can you remember any of them? Remind me. Remind me of a few things in the birth narrative that made him into a superhero-like person or a divine. We talk about the divinity of Moses.
He didn't need his mother's milk.
That's right. He didn't, he was weaned the moment he came out. Yep.
You circumcised them?
He was circumcised. They never even had to circumcise him, right? He just came out that way. It's like, whoa, this is great.
That would be great.
Yeah, the poor kid doesn't have to go through the torture. Yep. Okay, so things like this. Remember, we said the basket filled with light. The blisters on the princess were completely healed. All of these things, when the birth happens or during that time period. Yeah, so anyway, okay. So there's all these things that are happening. Oh, and we said, especially this word, remember, that he was good, he was beautiful, right? Which is the word tov. I heard somebody say tov, right? And tov means good or useful, right? So that's what we've got here. So he was somebody that was like Genesis chapter 1. Remember, the light was good, and the separation of the seas was good, and the separation of the seas this way was good, and putting sun and the moon were good. All these things were good, and then Moses is called good. So you're supposed to think of him as like a new creation. So the authors are doing this in the Hebrew Bible. This is not even Second Temple interpretation. But then they say, oh, he's good. Let's play with this cool idea because he's like really awesome. And so now, there's light coming out of him and fever blisters are being, whatever, all that stuff. Okay. So the second one was that he was the battle scenes, right? So the battle scenes were Moses is fighting with the Egyptians early on, as he figures out who he is, fighting with the Hebrew, fighting against the shepherds in Midian, those kinds of things, and him becoming like the thing, right? It says that he arises and everybody runs away. So there's lots of those kinds of stories where he has these superpowers that are happening. Okay, so that's battle scenes. The third one was intimacy with God. And we were most of the way through this, but we talked in this one about, I don't even remember what we talked about here. There's so many. I just summarized a few. I called it allowed into the presence, right? So Moses's face becomes, when he goes up in the mountain, he becomes bright like the sun, like the angels. And we were ending with this idea that he was one of the standing ones. And a standing one is an epithet. Epithet is a epithet, right? You were working on this week. Davin was. So epithet is a name that's given to someone, right? It's a title for them. So they're standing ones. And the angels are called standing ones. They stand in the presence of God. So they're just kind of like, I don't know. I think of them as like the red-caped emperor's royal guards. They're those people. But then they go and do stuff for the emperor when he wants them to. So these are the standing ones. And we were almost finished with that. If you've got your notes, you can find them on Tuesday School. Travis wonderfully puts those up every single time. And I'm most of the way down the page on allowed into the presence is what it says at the top. So I just talked about the standing one, which is about 3/4 of the way down. And then I'm going to read Ecclesiasticus, those of you who are seeing this. So Ecclesiasticus is just another one of those Second Temple interpreters. Some of you are thinking, who cares about these Second Temple interpreters? Remember why this is important. Because the New Testament sits in that same line of interpretation. They think about the world the same way all these other people think about the world. So when we see these things, when we see the way they interpret things, it makes sense to us that others would do the same, that the New Testament might be doing the same thing, that they're playing with ideas the same way that these weird things that we think are weird, how they're doing it. So that's why it helps us in our New Testament interpretation. So Ecclesiasticus says, and he brought out of him a merciful man, which found favor in the sight of all flesh, even Moses, beloved of God and men, whose memorial is blessed. He made him like to the glorious saints and magnified him so that his enemies stood in fear of him. So Moses is magnified. Again, think bright. Because he goes into the presence of God, he's glorified, he's magnified. And then Exodus says that he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He did not eat bread or drink water. You think, okay, think about that for a second, right? 40 days. Is that, like, we're so used to hearing that Moses fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, but you can't do that, right? I mean, it specifically says he fasted from food and water. So you can't make it more than what is it, 3 days without water, something like that? You might be able to make it 40 days without food. That's possible, although a lot of people can't make it, but you can if you got the right reserves. Water, you can't. So even at this time, they knew that 40 days was what divine people do, what people that are extraordinary, way beyond the norm. Okay, so you can go ahead and take this into the New Testament if you want, right? Because Jesus also goes into the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights and fasts. So you're supposed to see Jesus as a new Moses and Moses as a new super being, divine being. So the New Testament's playing with the same idea that these Hebrew authors are and these Second Temple interpreters are. So anyway, on the next page, I talk about Second Enoch and the New Testament, which I just said. And then there's just two more things there, which I wanted to throw out there. Eusebius, which is, by the way, super fun. If nobody's read Eusebius, you should read it. And Philo. Eusebius says, God descends from the throne and puts Moses on it. In case you're wondering how divine Moses is, in Eusebius, God himself gets off of God's throne and says, Moses, you get to sit on the throne. Okay, so that's that. Even if you're not saying that he's taking the place of God, he's definitely a human beyond all humans, right? He is divine. He sits above everything else. Remember, this was the whole plan too, right? Don't forget this. This was the whole plan, was that humanity would sit on the throne of God. That's what happens. That's what we did all this when we talked about Genesis, right? How they're moved. That's the whole point, is that the true human will one day get there. C.S. Lewis got that so beautiful, right? Cair Paravel, the sons of Adam and the sons of Eve will sit on the 4 thrones in Cair Paravel. Like, yes, that's the goal. That's what we see in Daniel chapter 7, right? That they get that the thrones are empty, and you're like, no, the thrones are empty. What are we going to do? Oh, the Son of Man, the Son of Humanity is coming, right? And that's what we've been waiting for with Daniel. Daniel's prophetic, of course. All right, so yeah. And Philo says he was named God and King of everything. So that's Moses's role. Okay, so that was just a wrap up from last week. Otherwise, we would have gone too fast and been done with this Bible study in 20 minutes, and I know you didn't want that to happen. So, yeah, so let's keep going. Symbols and wielders of power. Okay. So, what we're talking about here is the fourth one, wielder of powers, or symbols, or something you hold, right? Things that you're going to carry that show who you are. Okay, so in our modern day mythology, go ahead and give me some ideas of that. What are these kinds of things that show power in modern day mythology? Modern day mythology means basically your DC and Marvel comic movies.
Thor's hammer.
Thor's hammer. Perfect. What'd you say?
I was gonna say the staff.
The staff of the ineffable name. You're cheating. We're getting there. Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, you've done this before. Yep. So Thor's hammer is a big one, right? That's how he channels all of his power. Lightning comes into the,
Ada says Wonder Woman's lasso.
Excellent. Wonder Woman's lasso. Perfect. That's exactly right. Yep. And it wields truth, right? I mean, it's not only powerful because it can fight things, but it also brings truth out of people. This lasso does. Okay. What? Lantern?
Yeah, Green Lantern.
His ring?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. His ring. His ring is what gives him his power, right? That's a good one. Yeah. I didn't think of that one. Yep. Captain America.
A trident.
Say it again, Travis.
A trident.
Yeah, a trident. Good. So who carries a trident though?
Poseidon, Neptune,
Aquaman carries a trident.
Aquaman.
Yep. It's modern day mythology. We can't go back to Poseidon, right? That's ancient. That's Greek mythology, but we're trying to stay present tense.
Infinity Stones, the Infinity Gauntlet.
Okay, yeah, the Infinity
Yeah,
Gauntlet
those.
gives power to Thanos. Yeah. Yep, or if you're carrying the stones themselves, they give power, right? So through the Tesseract and other things. 10 rings? Is that the Shang-Chi stuff coming? Okay. I don't know Shang-Chi, so it's coming. We'll get to find out more. Trying to think.
Is Iron
Captain
Man suit something?
Yeah, maybe the Iron Man suit. Yeah. All right, so we've got a few of these anyway. But Moses has a very important one. Okay, what is that?
The staff.
His staff. Okay, he seems to always have a staff. And this staff always seems to be endued with some sort of special powers, something incredible that comes out of it. So now, on various occasions, if you read the Hebrew carefully, but even if you read your English carefully, you will find some sort of an ambiguity between whose staff this actually is. So there seem to be either two different staffs, one belonging to Aaron and one belonging to Moses, or one different staff that they kind of co-use that's also called the staff of God. Okay, so we've got all of these different ideas, the staff of God, the staff of Aaron, the staff of Moses, the one that buds, right? Remember the one buds, the one turns into a snake at one point, and there's one that's lifted above the waters and splits out the sea and holds the Amorites at bay, as long as he's holding up his arms. And a lot of people would say that holding up the arms is he's holding up his staff and they're holding up his arms there, right? So there's lots of ambiguity in there as to what's happening. In fact, Aaron and Moses is a weird connection right from the beginning when you start reading about Aaron and Moses. If you're honest with yourself, like these Second Temple interpreters are and like the rabbis are, they notice things that make them almost like they're one person sometimes. Or is Aaron a brother or is he someone else? Like, how come God has to explain who he is at one point? Like, does he not know who Aaron is? And especially after he's already met him. To go back and read the stories, there's all kinds. This is the beauty of Second Temple interpretation. They notice all of these little gaps in the story. We don't, because we're so used to reading them. And we know we're not allowed to ask questions, right? Because we're in good evangelical churches. We don't ask questions about stuff like that. But the reality is, like, Moses goes up the mountain like 4 times. He comes down like once. It's a mess. Like, when does he ever come down? You're like, did he just transport down there? I mean, the chances are good he just came down and went up and came down and went up. But they don't tell you lots of times that he came down. They do tell you lots of times he went up. And so the Second Temple interpreters are like, oh, this is cool. He went up. He didn't come down. What are we going to do with him coming down? All right, he's going to just all of a sudden appear there or something. They can come up with these stories because the Hebrew Bible isn't giving us what we want. It's not filling in the gaps for things. So with the staff, they can have a lot of fun. So they see that he does all these miracles with his staff. They also see that it seems to be a symbol of his kingship, kind of like a scepter. that he's carrying. It's his rule almost. And so, but it's a magical scepter. It's this talisman, this thing that they can do incredible things with that doesn't really make a lot of sense. This magician's rod. All right, I'm gonna skip a lot to try and get us there. So I want to read about these impossible tasks that he does. So, but before, like Tanhuma is that in your? Yeah, that if you've got the notes, it says something like T-A-N and then a really weird symbol after that, but it's just Tanhuma, which is just another one of those Second Temple rabbinic sources that's coming out. And it talks about these two silver trumpets that are blown in the presence of Moses. And they're only to be blown in the presence of a divine king. So a king that is exalted, that has been set up on a mountain, that is somehow, enthroned above everything else, a son of God in some sense. David is the exception in Tanhuma that these trumpets are blown before, but Moses is in the Midrash. Remember what Midrash is? Midrash are just these fantastical stories that are kind of like commentary to the scriptures. They're not really commentary. They're just fun stories that go along with them. Okay, so Midrashim. So they end up getting blown in Moses' presence as well. So just the fact that Tanhuma has these silver trumpets blown in his presence means this guy's divine. He's superhero status. Let's see here. The Samaritans and the rabbis recognize his rod as a scepter. This will be a wonder to you. In it is great and powerful worship. And then none make use of his scepter, for it was given to Moses, as scripture says, take this rod in your hand. So this rod is a symbol. I'm just quoting some places that have said what I've already said, that this rod is a symbol of his divinity in some way. And his appearance changes. Let's see here. I think that's in Targum Pseudo-Jonathan, but I can't find where my notes are on that. So maybe I might have to skip that. Sorry, everyone. Well, I do know that I don't remember where his appearance changes. I can't recall that. I thought that I wrote that down somewhere. I don't seem to do that. I've done that. So Targum Pseudo-Jonathan includes a much longer story about Moses' staff than the Hebrew Bible does. And it revolves around when Moses meets with Ruel. Do you guys remember who Ruel is? He has two other names. Anybody? Oh, nobody's going to risk this one. Good. Trivia Jeopardy, you guys all just lost your $1 million Jeopardy question. You could have done it. So Ruel is another name for Hobab. Anybody know who Hobab is? Woohoo! All right, you're going to learn something today, aren't you? It's another name for Jethro. You know Jethro, right? Somebody remembers Jethro? Not the Jethro from Beverly Hill, whatever. What is it? Beverly Hillbillies? Not that Jethro. I think that was his name. This is
The Midianite priest.
What'd you say?
The Midianite.
Yes, the Midian. Well, yes, probably so. Yeah, there's different traditions about that too. But in Hebrew Bible, yeah, he definitely seems to be in Midian. He's Zipporah's father, so it's Moses' father-in-law, the one who gives his daughter to Moses, this Jethro. Okay, so there's 3 different names there. So if you want to be a good evangelical fundamentalist, what you do is say that he has 3 different names. His name is Jethro, Hobab, Ruel, Midian's son. I don't know, something like that. Or you can say these are just different traditions that come down as to his name. Okay, so if you have an inerrancy viewpoint on the Bible, which is perfectly fine if you do, you have to have different names. They just call them different things. But if you don't, then it's okay for us to just say there's different traditions as to what his name was. So when Ruel learned that Moses fled from Pharaoh, Ruel, or Jethro, throws him into a pit. So here's the story in Pseudo-Jonathan. It Zipporah, his son's daughter, provided for him in secret for 10 years. At the end of the 10 years, she takes him out of a pit. Sorry, Reuel takes him out of the pit. Moses then goes into Reuel's garden and he gives thanks and praise before the Lord, who performed miracles and mighty deeds for him. Here he notices the rod that had been created at twilight, on which was clearly engraved the great and glorious name with which he was to work wonders in Egypt, and with which he was to divide the sea of reeds and bring water from the rock. And it was fixed in the middle of the garden. And immediately he stretched forth his hand and he takes it. Okay, so this staff is right there, right in the middle of this garden of Reuel, this one that one day he's going to do all these amazing things in. So how it came to be in Reuel's garden is not mentioned there. We don't know how it got there to begin with. But if you read Sefer HaYashar, which I think Dr. Blaze actually just bought recently, Sefer HaYashar, you can find out where this staff comes from. And the story is just fantastic. You can take it all the way back. So after the world was created, when man was expelled from the Garden of Eden, okay, Eden, Adam takes his staff when he begins to till the soil. Then the staff reached Noah, then Saim, so Noah and Shem, then Abraham, and was given to Yitzchak. And even in his wanderings, Yaakov, Jacob, so it went from Isaac to Jacob, had his stick with him and never lost it. When he came to Egypt, he gave it to Yosef. After Yosef's death, Joseph's, right? The prince of Egypt came to his home, plundered it, and brought it to Pharaoh's palace. So now the staff is at Pharaoh's palace. So it's gone from Adam. Some of the traditions would actually say that this staff began as a part of the tree of life. Okay, Sefer HaYashar doesn't specify that, but it was a branch from there. It was carved out of the actual tree of life. That's why it's super powered. So now it's in the court of Pharaoh. Because remember, Joseph would have taken it from wherever he was, right, Israel, into probably Midian. Remember, the Midianite slave traders pick him up. Well, one story is Midianite, the other was a different one. And they're taken into Egypt, and then he becomes like, a king of Egypt, basically, the second in charge. So now the staff is there. On seeing the staff, he knew he must have it as his own. That is, Reuel was there, and he saw it there because he was an advisor in the Egyptian court. So he steals it from the palace and brings it to his home, where he anchors it in the ground of his garden. All the strong men tried to pull it out, but no one succeeded. And actually, this was a test given to all of those who would want to suit Zipporah. All right, so this is not the coolest story ever. You've got to remember this one forever. I actually wrote a whole sermon around this once about Indiana Jones. I'm convinced that the fourth Indiana Jones should not have been the aliens. It should have been the search for the staff of the ineffable name. Okay, this staff. Can you imagine if we find this staff, the powers that it had? And of course, Indiana Jones can be doing all the research. He can find out where it started. It was a piece of the tree of life, and he can go trace all of this back. And
it's the Excalibur story again.
It's the what story?
It's Excalibur again.
I was going to say, in the garden, in the rock.
Next, right? Yes, exactly. He has to pull it out of, in order to get the woman, he has to pull it out. Okay, so so he's lifting, Moses finds the staff in the garden, and it says that he was lifting it like he's lifting a tree from the forest. All right, both of you stop laughing. I know what you're laughing about, so move on. I tried really hard to make it happen. All right, without smiling, but I couldn't do it. Okay, because you guys. All right, so it's like lifting a tree from the forest, and he was successfully able to do it. I'll just say it like that, all right? So Moses then gets the hand of Zipporah, his new wife, and yeah, this sounds exactly like Excalibur, doesn't it? So the Excalibur stories are much later than this, but probably rooted in the same mythology, the same ideas. So, but Excalibur, interestingly, may have come from another, if we trace the mythology back, Excalibur is about becoming the king, right? Only the king gets it. So this one was about getting the woman. This other one is about getting the king. But I wonder if there was one tradition that may have led into both of these. So this is the coolness of Second Temple interpretation, trying to figure out where these interpretations come from, tracing them back. But either way, they're both weapons par excellence, right? These are the best weapons out there. Okay. We also know the staff was, according to Targum's Pseudo-Jonathan. Remember what Targums are? Anybody remind me of Targums?
Sounds like a kid.
Tell me. What's a Targum? Nobody remembers Targums. Okay, so Targums are Aramaic translations of the Hebrew Bible. But certain Targums have a lot more flexibility in the way they translate. Because remember, any translation is interpretation. Doesn't matter what language you translate from, even modern day French to modern day English, you have to make some interpretive jumps here and there, right? That's just the way it is. But especially if we're talking about languages that are a couple thousand years old. Okay, there is no Hebrew today like there was Hebrew back then. There actually is no English today like there was English even 500 years ago, right? So English changes over the centuries. That's just what happens. So a Targum is an Aramaic translation, but they fill in the gaps. So there'll be a sentence here and a sentence here, and they'll fill in this middle part. And it'll just be an extra. It's not, but this is the stories. The Targums are what the people at Jesus's time knew, right? They didn't have access to the scrolls, the Hebrew scrolls. Most of them couldn't even read it. Okay, some of them didn't even know Hebrew. They knew Aramaic. It's a cognate. It's a close language to Hebrew, very close. But when they would read the Holy Scriptures, they'd be read in Hebrew and they might not have been able to follow it. Then they read Aramaic and they'd be like, okay, I get what's being said. But there'd be other pieces in there that weren't in the Hebrew Bible. Okay, just like if they were reading Greek in the Septuagint, there are interpretations like that word asteos, right, for good. Moses was born good. That's why his mom hid him, because he was good. Well, the Greek says that he was beautiful. So they start playing with that idea, beautiful. Why? I mean, every kid is beautiful to their parents. Why do you save them? There was something more, there was something deeper. So people start playing with all of this. Okay. So the Targum, that's how they would have thought of it. That's how they would know Scripture was based on this. So they might have known who the opponents of Moses were in the magicians. They might have known their names. Everybody would have known their names, even though their names aren't mentioned in the Old Testament. Even you might know their names. Why would you know do you know their names? Anybody know their names? Hebrew magicians?
They're in the Prince of Egypt.
The Egyptians. In the Prince of Egypt, yeah. What are their names? Do they have names in there?
They do, but I don't remember them.
Yeah, me neither.
Usually it's Janus and Jambres. Okay, and it's in the New Testament. Why is it in the New Testament? Because the Aramaic translation gives you extra stuff, right? It's very cool. And the people would read that, and that's how they thought of it. These are their names. There's no inspired text that gives us their names. It was just the tradition. Maybe it really was their names, but the Hebrew Bible doesn't tell us. So the New Testament interpreters are grabbing hold of Old Testament ideas and also things in their world of interpretation. Like, for instance, when you get to the book of Jude, right? And Jude is going to tell you certain stories about this place called Tartarus and these angels, or the story about Moses having an argument with Satan, or not Moses, the angel having a battle with Satan about the body of Moses. And you're like, when did that happen? It didn't. It's not in the Hebrew Bible anywhere. Or they give you these other, like Peter will tell you about the demons that are put into the pit. You're like, where is that? Oh, that comes from Genesis 6. Another translation, another interpretation of it, like Enoch. They would have known the book of Enoch, so they would have brought that stuff in. So, okay, anyway, so it's very important to know this stuff. So anyway, Targum Pseudo-Jonathan says, of the sapphire, talking about the staff, was made of sapphire from the throne of glory. So the staff is made of sapphire, 40 seahs, which is the weight that it was, and had the glorious name clearly engraved on it. The glorious name being, what's the glorious name?
When we're not allowed to say
Right.
YH. WH.
YH,
Yahweh.
Yahweh. Yahweh. We say Jehovah because we add in all these little consonants, right? Jehova. Jehovah. That's what we say there, but it's not right. But we like to add in stuff. It's from the word Adonai. You guys know that, right? It's the word Adonai and Yahweh put together, so it comes up to Jehovah. That's how we get the vowels. We don't have any vowels for this word. Okay, so let's see here. We did Sefer HaYasher, we did Excalibur, we did the appearance of the staff. So here's the C in Midrash Tanhuma. Okay, so here's this other midrash, and Moses is learning of his almost death, his imminent demise is happening soon, and he cries out for an advocate on his behalf. Okay, we're going to get to the death scene of Moses in just a second. That's coming up, and they're awesome. But here's just a little picture, because this is the sea itself. The Red Sea is his advocate. Moses doesn't want to die, so the Red Sea jumps up. Son of Amram, how is this day different from others? You are the son of Amram, aren't you? It is you who once came to me with your staff and smote me and divided me into 12 paths while I was powerless against you because the Shekinah accompanied you at your right hand. At your right hand in that staff. Your staff split me into 12 pieces, right? Which is interesting because the Red Sea just says it split into 2, but here's the traditions, right? There are different traditions as to how this happened, what happened here. So now we don't know if the Shekinah is like a glory cloud, if it's Yahweh himself, if it's the staff, if it's an attribute of Moses, whatever it is. But Moses is coming with all of the light around him. So in my movie Addled Brain, right, I see this, it's slow motion and his hair is blowing back, right? And there's this just light shining off of him as he's walking with his staff and his power, right? This is what you're supposed to see. And the sea remembers this weapon that Moses has in his hand and makes this connection between this weapon and Moses's divinity or his superhero status. Okay, that's how the sea remembers him. Okay, you can see the sea looking up and, oh crap, it's Moses, right? And then the splits it open because the sea is a chaos monster, right? The sea is called Rahav. Remember that? Rahav. The B has soft sound, or Rahav. So this is one of the Egyptian sea monsters. All right, so, and the staff is the one that forced it into submission. Remember throughout the Old Testament, right? Yahweh himself forces the sea into submission. There's tons, we did this, the chaos conf motif just a few weeks ago. So that Moses can do this shows that he's like God. He's channeling, at least he's channeling the power of God. Okay, so Pasikta de Rab Kahana says, what did the Red Sea flee from? See and flee from? On this point, Rabbi Judah and Rabbi Nehemiah differ. According to Rabbi Judah, the sea saw Moses' staff and fled. But according to Rabbi Nehemiah, his name, the ineffable name of the Lord, Yahweh, was graven upon the staff, and seeing the name, the sea fled. Okay, so they're afraid of this staff one way or another, whether it's the name on the staff or the staff itself, they're afraid of it. Deuteronomy Rabbah has Samael, the angel. You remember him from Enoch when we read a big portion of that. Samael wants the soul of Moses. So it says this, immediately Moses became wroth, and taking hold of the staff on which was engraven the ineffable name, he fell upon Samael with all his strength until he fled from before him. And he pursued him with the ineffable name and removed the beam of glory between his eyes and blinded him. So there's some argument, like, so basically he's running after him with a staff. He takes the beam of glory from, and now he's got this. So, and he destroys it. Like, so apparently these are like solid things, these beams of glory that are flowing out from him. Or, it's just light that blinds him, whatever. The idea is that there's some kind of superpower going on in here. So the angel of death cannot stand against Moses. That's the cool part of all of this. And we're going to deal with that in just a second again. All right, so that is his what do we call this? Symbols of power. Okay, so we have one last one. You ready? This last one is how Moses disappears / dies / Huntington, Indiana. Sorry. / dies / assumption, the assumption of Moses, the Geniza event, the hiding of him, right? So there's some ambiguity going on with what happens to Moses at the end of his life story. So, and this is true, like, even gods die, right, in mythology, or at least most of them do. Even immortals die, like they have ways of being killed. There are certain things that can happen. So now the Bible actually says in Deuteronomy 34 that he dies and Moses dies, right? You've seen that before. But the circumstances of death are really strange. So there's a lot going on in here. Like, we're told that no one knows where he was buried. So that's a little weird. Why is it that nobody knows, like, did he really get buried? Did he really die? And so all these Second Temple interpreters are quick to jump on what happened to Moses, because he was healthy. I mean, at the end of his life, it says that he could see perfectly, right? He had strength. Everything seemed to be really great. His eyes were not dim, nor was his strength gone in Deuteronomy 34. So, and the fact that he lives to 120 years is supposed to tell you that he's like, it's like the older people, right? It's like the way it was a long time ago. 120 years, thank you. 120 years is like a king. And you remember we talked about this when we got to Genesis chapter 5, those king lists where people live to be 1,000 years old, that there's some kind of special place, status for those kinds of people.
Matt Davis had a comment that this seems almost a parallel to how the Virgin Mary was treated / described in the Catholic Church.
With, wait, which is like that? Like how old is that comment? I don't know from which comment we're talking. Did you just now say it?
It's been a couple minutes. You still there, Matt?
Maybe with the glowing, like how he's revered and glorious, how she was revered and glorious like that. Absolutely. Very, very similar. All right, so here I want to talk about the death of Moses. And so I separated into 3 sections, I think you see here. The decision or the decree, I've called it, the demotion, and then his actual death. So the first thing is that there has to be some sort of a decree for Moses to even be able to be killed, to let him die. God has to decide ahead of time and make some formal decree that says, okay, Moses has to die. Like, it's gone on too long. He's human. He's got to die. But even God has trouble getting to the spot where Moses has to die because Moses is so super incredible. So Deuteronomy Rabbah uses the death scene to exalt Moses, to exalt him into this incredible superpower. Moses hears the decision from the high court, from Yahweh, about his death. And unfortunately, he makes light of the decision, like, yeah, whatever, you know, and he trusts his nearly perfect past to save him. So God realizes he's making light of the decree that Moses isn't praying for mercy. Like, he found he's going to die. He's not praying for mercy. He's more like, yeah, you know what, like I'm really going to die, even though Yahweh has said that he's going to die. So he takes the opportunity, Yahweh does, to swear by his own name, you know how powerful that is, that Moses would not enter into the land. Okay, this is Deuteronomy Rabbah 11. It almost appears that God needs Moses to sin in some way in order for him to keep him from glory. He has to have something like this. So, of course, eventually Moses begins to pray, and God gets really concerned. God gets concerned that Moses's prayers are going to be effectual. Like, the prayers themselves can force God into something. So he gets really concerned. And he says in Deuteronomy Rabbah, he says, he had it proclaimed in every gate of each of the heavens and in every court that they should not receive Moses' prayer, nor bring it before him, because the decree against him had been sealed. So basically, when he prays, I don't want to hear from any of you angels about the prayer because I've made a decree, and we don't want Moses to get up. You know, his prayers are too powerful. Do not bring them to me. Now, at that hour, God hastily summoned the angel in charge of the proclamations, Ahasuerus by name, and he commanded the ministering angels, descend quickly, bolt all the gates of every heaven, because the voice of the prayer threatens to force its way into heaven. And the angels sought to ascend to heaven because of the sound of Moses' prayers, for his prayer was like a sword which tears and cuts its way through everything and spares nothing. Isn't that awesome? Like, that's just such good language. Moses' prayers are so powerful. God's like, close all the doors, right? Batten down the hatches because his prayers, they're forcing God into something. In fact, Moses repeats his prayers 115 times. And despite the locking of the gates of heaven, Moses is still able to get through. He's able to communicate to God because later on we find out that God does listen to his prayer at some point. So finally, though, God sends Gabriel to get Moses's soul. Okay, Gabriel, we all know who Gabriel is, right? Gabriel, you go get the soul. Gabriel politely refuses. The story is just wonderful. Master of the universe, he says, how can I witness the death of him who is equal to 60 myriads? And how can I behave harshly to one who possesses such qualities? Like, no, thank you. Like, I can't do this to Moses. Even though you're asking me to do this, I can't do this. So Michael is asked, and he refuses. This is Deuteronomy. This is still the same section. He refuses. And Samael, clothed in anger and ruthlessness and carrying a sword, is finally sent. So Gabriel and Michael have said no. Samael is now after. He's like, all right, I'm doing this, right? Angel of death is on his way to get Moses. When Samael saw Moses sitting and writing down the ineffable name, so Moses just sitting there, right? Because this is Moses, right? This is what he does. He just writes the ineffable name over and over again. And how the radiance of his appearance was like unto the sun, and he was like unto an angel of the Lord of hosts, he became afraid of Moses and declared, of a surety, angels cannot take away Moses' soul. So he's not even doing it. Moses then spoke, saying that he had more strength than all who come into this world. And then he starts listing his accomplishments. Samael is forced to retreat before Moses, never accomplishing his goal. There's another story in Petarit Moshe that talks about Samael actually attacking Moses at some point, I think it's just called the angel of death at that place. And Moses actually starts uttering the ineffable name over and over again. And the angel's sword is forced from his hand, and he can't even retreat. He's too feeble. He just falls down. He can't even back up because Moses, with the name of God on his voice, is that powerful. So even in his death scene, what should be his death scene, Moses is more powerful than the angel of death. All right. So you can see what these Second Temple interpreters think about Moses. Right? They think he's incredible. So that's the decree. The demotion, that is, he has to be moved down a peg from his divine status down in order to get him to die at some point. They have to take away his authority. So I'm not going to tell you every little bit of the stories here, but basically at some point he gives his authority, part of it to Joshua. They determined that you can't give all of his authority away because no human person could ever handle the power of God that is on Moses. So he splits it into Joshua and the 70 elders. They all take a portion of his authority because it takes 71 people to handle what it was that Moses was able to handle before. And then that demotion makes it possible for Moses to be destroyed later on. Joshua himself says he can't believe what happens. He says the Israelites, this is again in Tanhuma, the Israelites followed and found Moses at the entrance of Joshua's tent. Joshua was seated and Moses was standing. Okay, remember it's supposed to be the other way around when it comes to who's the teacher. So, and Joshua said to him, what happened? They said to Joshua, what happened to you that you're seated while Moses, our master, is standing? And Joshua raised his eyes and saw Moses, and he tore his clothes and burst into tears, crying out, my teacher, my father, and my Lord. Right? So he now realizes that he's been demoted in status. Moses is no longer the superhero anymore, which is important for him to be able to die. So then Moses betook himself to Joshua, dressed him, put the crown on him, seated him upon a golden throne. So now Joshua is taking over the power so that Moses can die. And I've got one more little story there from Tanhuma Ethanon. Says he then ordered the golden throne to be brought in, which he covered with a linen and a woolen cloth, with all other beautiful and costly garments, as is the custom for kings. Moses did not rest until Joshua seated himself upon the golden throne, as is the custom with the kings of the world. And against Joshua's will, Moses ministered to him in every needful way and laid upon Joshua, who still protested, his beams of glory. Right, so he took his beams off and gave them to him, his glory beams. And Moses thereupon got hold of Joshua and led him out of the tent. And against Joshua's will, they stepped forth, and Joshua had precedence, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so Joshua is now the man. Okay, Joshua is in charge. He's crowned king, so Moses has given up his kingship. So the most popular midrash about how Moses loses his life is through a kiss. So the worst possible one, apparently in literature, the worst way you can lose your life is by croup, apparently, right? This coughing illness. But the best way is just through a kiss of God. He just kisses him, and then he loses his life. The Targums, or at least the paraphrastic Targums, say, therefore was Moses, the servant of the Lord, gathered there in the land of Moab by the kiss of the Lord. So this is the best way for him to die. Let's see here. What do I want to say? Because we're running out of time. I will read the Geniza in the Assumption in Josephus. Josephus talks about that. Let's see. Do you guys have that? Yeah. As he was going to embrace Eleazar and Joshua and was still discoursing with them, a cloud stood over him on a sudden, and he disappeared in a certain valley, although he wrote in the holy books that he died, which was done out of fear, lest they should venture to say that because of his extraordinary virtue, he went to God. Basically, he didn't really die, he just went to God. But they wrote he died because, that's just the best that they could handle at the time. So the holy books were not accurate. So, Gavin, it's 6 o'clock, I think, just so you know. Okay, I hear them playing. So, all right, I'm gonna go for another 15 minutes. So, okay. Let's see here. A vote. Let's skip a vote. Let's get the response in Deuteronomy Rabbah. Master of the universe, I know that thou art the God of all the spirits and all souls. The souls of the dead and the living are in thy keeping. And thou hast created and formed me and placed me within the body of Moses for 120 years. This is the soul of Moses responding when the soul is asked to give up his human host, right? So the soul says, I've been in here for 120 years, and now is there a body in the world purer than the body of Moses, in which there's never even been an offensive smell, nor worm, nor maggot, nor any kind of vermin? Therefore I love him, and I do not desire to leave him. All right, that's what you want your soul to say about you. Like, this dude doesn't even smell. He doesn't have a body odor, for crying out loud. Like, he's never had a disease. I just want to stay here forever. So God commands the soul again and again, and the soul keeps saying, no, I respect Moses too great. In fact, the soul says, do you remember, like, ever since he's even met you at the burning bush, he's had no marital relations with his wife. You can hear this starting to get into a medieval rabbinic way of thinking about things, like sex is bad. And so he has made himself pure in some sort of way. But nobody wants to participate. The angels don't want to participate in the death of Moses. God himself is a little bit afraid of the death of Moses. And the soul that God put in there at his birth, whatever you want to say about how the soul works, the soul doesn't even want to leave. Nobody wants Moses to die. And one of the traditions actually has that Moses himself has to bury himself, which is just the strangest, because no one's willing even to bury him, which is just fantastic. That's Numbers Rabbah. So, let's see here. The angels mourned his death and mourned at his death. And in that day, the hymn of the heavenly host was not sung because of the passing of Moses. Now was there such a day from the one on which the Lord had made man upon the earth, nor shall there be such forever, that the hymn of the angels should stop on account of men, because he loved him very much. So even the angels stop singing glory to God when Moses dies. And here is the Kushelevsky summary here. This is the view of Second Temple interpreters. Moses' death is portrayed as a cosmic event, mourned by the angels themselves and all heavenly creatures. The versions of the first century present Moses' death as a cosmic and mythical event that left a strong impact on the universe. Similarly, they portray Moses as a unique being elevated on a scale which is larger than life. Okay, so this is how Second Temple interpreters see Moses. Not merely human, something in between God and man. So the question is, that we have for our last few minutes, the question is, does the Bible support this kind of a reading? Is there any understanding that is justified about Moses being this kind of superhuman being? And the answer is yes. And a way that we really need to think about this is with, believe it or not, I'm going to say this, Westminster Confession has this beautiful section in it, in its catechism, about prophets, priests, and kings. And all of these are mediatorial offices. So they stand between God and man. Moses is the number one character in the Old Testament that stands between God and man. So think of this as God, man, and in between are these groups of people that represent man to God and God to man in some way. They are exalted. They stand above earth, below heaven. Sometimes they enter into heaven. Sometimes they aren't invited into heaven, but they still are able to get into heaven. So anytime you're looking in the Old Testament and you see somebody exalted into the presence of God, you're supposed to think something special about them. They're exalted in some kind of a way, as a king, a priest, or a prophet. So Isaiah, right, in Isaiah chapter 6, right, he's in the presence of the Lord. I saw the Lord lofty and exalted, and the train of his robe filled the temple. And I saw the seraphim singing, holy, holy, holy is Lord God Almighty, right? Remember all that stuff? Isaiah is a prophet. That's where he gets his prophetic call. He gets to go into the presence of God. Kings go into the presence of God, right? Because they are icons or representatives, right? They're vice regents. Vice regents. They're kings under the great king. So we have a suzerain king and a vassal king. Okay, we're the big king and the little king, the conquering king and the one who owes taxes, right? That's these kings. So we're vice regents. And by the way, according to Genesis 1 through 11, you are also a vice regent, right? You get to be on the throne. That's the whole idea. You are human kings, but you're exalted in some way. You're elect for a purpose, to be an in-between between God and man. That's you, Christians, Israel, right? That's your position as kings. Priests, of course, they're in the presence of God. That's the whole thing. They go into, like literally, they go past the curtain, right? Into that holy place. That's where they give the sacrifice. So, all right, but there's lots of places that do this. So Isaiah has that courtroom. Micaiah is in that council room. Remember, he's one of the prophets that does that in 2 Kings. Amos says that surely the sovereign Lord does nothing without revealing his plan. And that word plan is the same word that's used for council or the council. So this council motif where you can go into the presence of God. And we've talked about that here before. So prophets have exalted status. Exodus says, he shall speak for you to the people, and it shall come about that as he shall be a mouth for you, and you shall be as God to him. This is God saying that Moses will be God to Pharaoh. And in Exodus 7, he says, see, I make you God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron shall be your prophet. So he's exalting their gods in this sense. Acts talks about Moses. Hebrews talks about Moses. You can look these passages up if you want to, but Hebrews is probably the most enjoyable Second Temple book after hearing all of this stuff, right? Because it will start off telling you about how great the angels are, how great the priesthood is, Aaron, and how great Moses is, right? And you're just like, well, yeah, these are great characters in the Old Testament, angels. I mean, but the idea is, though, that Moses is of such a status that he's almost like God. So for the author of Hebrews to then tell you that Jesus is greater than Aaron, greater than the angels, and greater than Moses.
Would you say greater and the new? Would that be the same?
Yeah, it's the same. He's taken the place of Moses as prophet, priest, and king, right? So that whole idea that Moses is kind of a priest is that ambiguity between he and Aaron. But he's definitely a prophet. He's called the greatest of prophets. We've just seen how much he's a king, right? But he's basically the king of Israel, an early king. He's not voted in or anything. God makes him that. But he is a king character in this. So he is all of these things. And so when Jesus comes and the Hebrews author is like, well, you know Moses? And the reader's like, yeah, we know Moses. Moses is the greatest ever. He stands on the throne. Next, he's one of the standing ones. He's like an angel. He's greater than Aaron. He's the best in the world, right? And they're like, well, whatever. He's a servant in the house, right? That's all Moses is, a servant in the house. But Jesus is a son in the house, right? You're just like, your mind is supposed to be blown at this point. That's what Hebrews is trying to do for you as you're walking your way through it. And of course, remember, Hebrews is going to use so many Old Testament references. By faith, this happened. By faith, this happened. And each of these stories, all these great stories that are leading you to know that he's better than each one of them. By faith, Abraham did this. By faith, Noah did this. By faith, God created, like each of these things that happens, he's better than all of these things. So Hebrews 3:5 is that famous passage where Moses is faithful in his house, but Jesus is the son of the house. So anyway, there you go. I don't know what time it is, but it's got to be pretty close. I have 7 minutes. So go play guitar. They do. They changed the time just for you. They changed the time for you.
So
I need you. I need your voice, please. My son is here, and he can now add to our music. So sorry, Warsaw people. Now I've got him.
Let's turn it.
He's mine for 6 weeks at least. So, all right. So what do you think? Any comments for our 7 minutes that I have left? Looks like we've lost a lot of people somewhere in there. Tired when I start getting excited about Tanhuma, which makes sense. But looks like I've still got 9 squares. So nice to see all of you 9 at least.
Is anybody taking offense to this? Because Moses is so great that all of a sudden this Jesus guy is like, who is Jesus to?
Well, I'm confident the Jews wouldn't be very happy with this.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at.
Right. I mean,
they're like, who are you guys? Who is this guy Jesus?
yep. Obviously, they don't think Jesus is who we think he is.
Still.
But remember, these are Jewish authors that are saying these things. So
Yeah.
they live in the same time zone, in the same world, the same
My
hermeneutical
question: do you think
milieu.
this is still a point of contention? I mean, obviously it is, but I'm not sure. How much of a point of contention is it?
Well, this is a question of what kind of Jews are we talking about?
Messianic Jews? No, obviously not.
Well, obviously not, but I just mean, even depending on, there's a continuum, even in Christianity, no matter what religion is, there's a continuum as to how seriously you take your faith, right? Are you just somebody who checks the box of Christian? Do you follow, do you believe in an inerrant scripture, et cetera? The same is true with Jews,
Right.
right? So the vast majority of Jews, I'm guessing, don't believe anything about their scriptures. They don't think they actually happened. They're just cool stories, and they follow it as a tradition.
Okay.
It's just like, these are traditions, and this is part of our life. So Judaism, religion is part of the culture.
I just have so many questions. That you just said that Judaism is thinking of that. Why are fundamentalists? Christians think that these are real stories.
Why do we think they're real stories? It's a great question.
Do we?
Some of them think these stories, some of these happen actually.
because
happen.
if the Old Testament's not literal, then the New Testament isn't either.
You're saying what they think?
Sure, the fundamentalist, if you don't have the one that's literal, then the other one's not. It opens up the second one to attack. So the
That's what
It might
fundamental.
not be.
It takes away their whole faith, Trav. It takes away, for me, what I've noticed, and this, it really, it dissolves what they feel like is their foundation.
Yeah, right. And it makes sense, right? Because if you have an allegorical Old Testament, then why don't you have a Jesus who just kind of rises in your heart? So we've got to keep everything. It has to be, 6,000 year creation. All those things have to stay in order for us to hold on to Jesus actually
So much
resurrected
deeper
from the
than
dead.
that,
But it's so much
Well,
deeper than that. Yeah.
So as an application point, why don't you
Why don't you what?
have an allegorical New Testament?
I don't know that that's an application point exactly.
It's a question, right?
Yeah, we did this last
Like,
week.
how does this what does this teach us about Jesus? I mean, like, so Jesus is a better Moses,
Mhm.
but you're saying most of the stuff about Moses was made up. So are we saying that most of the stuff about Jesus is made up too?
No, we're not saying that. We're saying not that it was made up, but that the stories are designed to do something different than give us historical accuracy every single time. It's still our job as exegetical brilliant scholars or whatever to try to figure out which passages are giving us history and which passages are not. But it's certainly unfair for us to say if they're all history, they all have to be history or none of them have to be history. Like what kind of dichotomy is that? That's ridiculous. Like no one thinks that. Parables aren't history. It says it right there, right in the Bible. They're not history. So yeah, what?
Part myth is myth. The concept of myth now for us is different than it was then. Then it was partial truth. So you're embellishing some truth. Is that?
Yeah, I mean,
Correct.
labels are labeled. Like so, whatever we can call it, myth or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Yes, the way they told history was embellished history. That's just what you did when you're telling stories. Who doesn't tell a story and embellish the story? Otherwise, it's a really boring story. Like when your wife comes home and tells you the story and she actually tells you the actual story, you just want to right? Please make the story better. Give it some flair, whatever it is that you need. Tell the story as a storyteller. That's what they did back then.
That goes to the C.S. Lewis quote that I sent you, where he all these other myths, because you think C.S. Lewis is a Cambridge professor. He's educated.
Yeah.
He knows about these other myths.
Oh yeah.
Most likely, yeah. And he says the culmination of all these myths come into truth in Jesus. And so, and I'm thinking, I wish I could read the quote. I don't have it with me.
Did you put that on Tuesday Schools, Travis? I sent it to you. That quote from C.S. Lewis about.
I did not, but
What?
I did not, but I can.
Slacker. Yeah.
Can you read
I
it?
know.
Do you have it right there by any chance?
Do you suddenly put all your messages on a Tuesday school? Look at a lot.
I thought that I said please put that one on there, but maybe I did not.
Maybe.
Yeah, he's not going to have it immediately. I would say.
Right.
But yeah, that Jesus is the true myth. Like he's the culmination of all the myths in reality, the real story made true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what makes the story so much better than all the other stories is that he actually did die and rise again. It's not just a story about the fertility cycle, or the, the hot and the cold going away,
Well, the fact that we're still talking about him makes me something happened. He keeps coming to people in mystical experiences. I've seen Jesus. He's resurrecting in your heart. Some people it's powerful stuff.
Right.
Why does the church exist? I mean, I don't know. There's always that's 5 questions for you right there,
Yeah, none of them. Oh, they're all rhetorical, though. I didn't see any
Yeah.
reason to answer
for
each one of them. But
Did you want me to read this, or I just put it on the page?
all right, Joshua wants you to, and if we've got 2 minutes, you can do it.
All right. Now the story of Christ is simply a true myth, a myth working on us in the same way as the others, but with the tremendous difference that it really happened. And one must be content to accept it in the same way, remembering that it is God's myth, where the others are men's myths, i.e. the pagan stories are God expressing himself through the minds of poets, using such images as he found there, while Christianity is God expressing himself through what we call, quote, real things. Therefore, it is true, not in the sense of being a, quote, description of God, parenthetical that no finite mind can take in, but in the sense of being the way in which God chooses to or can appear to our faculties. The quote doctrines we get out of the true myth are, of course, less true. They are the translations into our concepts and ideas of that which God has already expressed in a language more adequate, namely the actual incarnation, crucifixion, and resurrection. Does this amount to a belief in Christianity? At any rate, I am now certain that this Christian story is to be approached in a sense as I approach other myths, and that it is the most important and full of meaning. I am also nearly certain that it really happened.
Yep.
Man. Thanks, Trev.
Pretty good.
That was a mic drop.
C.S. Lewis, not Travis McConnell.
We'll give you credit. I mean, Toby Mac takes a lot of things and then gets credit for them all over the internet. I'm pretty sure I heard all of that long before you were born there, Toby Mac, but whatever, you can take credit for it if you want to. So, yeah. All right,
There's
guys.
nothing new under the sun.
Well, I'll say we're officially done, and